So, Shay, I just want to ask you this question. And first, of course, I want to thank you for saying yes to this. It really means a lot to me. I know I've been following your story about, how parents have impact on the children and being raised by a narcissist parent. I mean, as you define it, I never knew I was also parented like that. And I think it's a culture. I mean, especially for Asian, it's not something good or bad, but this is just the culture. But I think what I want to do also for the Working Moms Academy is to have an awareness for the parents to understand, what is something that we could do better as parents so we can raise better children. So if you will be reparented, can you just share what would you have wished, your parents would have raised you?
Yes, absolutely. I would be more than happy to share that. And thank you for having me today, Wanda. This is awesome. Um, narcissistic parenting is a whole subtopic in its own that anyone can research and dive into. There's plenty of books, there's a lot of resources out there that have helped me around narcissistic parenting or narcissistic family models and what that looks like and what that does to a child raised in that environment long term. So it's interesting that you brought up the Asian culture because that's you have great awareness. There is a lot of that going on. And for those listening who don't know, I'll explain a little bit about what that is. So essentially, when a child is born in a healthy family dynamic, it will be the job of the parent to attune to the needs of the child. That is what we all come into this world wanting and needing as children. That is what ultimately creates a healthy child who can grow and feel safe and adapt and evolve. But for a narcissistic parent, it becomes the inversion of that. So instead of the parent attuning to the needs of the child, it's the opposite. The child is raised to have to attune to the needs of the parent. Um, and in a sense, never really gets to be a child, because they automatically come into the world having to walk on eggshells, always anticipate their mother's needs or their father's needs. And therefore, at a very young age, this kind of robs the child of their authentic spirit. They'll grow up not really knowing who they are because they've just been living in this environment where in order to survive, they have to make mommy and daddy happy. So they're going to, develop these coping mechanisms and this personality even that might not even really be them, but it's what they needed to survive childhood. Um, and so this is very common. This happens all over the world. I believe definitely in the United States where I grew up. I've seen examples of this left and right where people will say, well, I had a really good childhood. But when I really dig into that and I start asking questions, I find they're defining a good childhood based on, well, we had money and my family never struggled. We had food on the table, we had the lights on. I went to a good school. Well, my parents paid for me to go to college. And they're sort of defining like a good childhood based on finance and based on this idea of like keeping up with the Joneses, which maybe you've heard of before,
Yeah, yeah.
instead of looking at uh the deeper truth within the family of was there actually authenticity and love. um that is not clearly defined for a lot of people. They equate their childhood to, did we have money, did we have a good school and all of these things. But in reality, you could have a better childhood and grow up in a trailer park. But it doesn't matter if you're poor and you live in a trailer park. If your parents truly love you and aren't acting from a place of narcissistic parenting in that you're made to attune to their needs, you can actually grow up with a lot better self-esteem because you're not constantly tending to the needs of the parent. So a lot of times people will say like, oh, well, I had a great childhood, I went into a good college and this and that. But when I really dig, I find out that, their parents were very narcissistic toward them. Their parents basically withheld love if they were not the child that they wanted them to be. There's a quote that I always share that's so important. It's essentially that so many parents, they go their whole lives missing out on who their child actually is because they're so focused on who they want the
Them
child
to
to be.
be.
So
Mm.
this is the beauty of being a parent. You get to experience your child, you get to experience this life that comes into the planet. And when a baby's born, we're all excited, we're like, oh my gosh, it's so precious, it's amazing. But if the parent doesn't have a great self-awareness around their own insecurities and has not resolved their own childhood trauma, they are inevitably going to start projecting that onto the kid. And very young, even as young as 2 years old, or as soon as the kid can kind of start to mirror them and act in a manner that's resembles a small human. So when you talk about my childhood, and oh, if I could go back and be reparented, what would be the key thing? That is mainly the key thing. My parents did not tend to the needs of myself and my sisters. Instead, it was on us to tend to their needs. What can we do to make them happy? A lot of times there was a lot of pressure to perform well in school, which I'm sure you can relate to, the Asian culture, like
Of
exactly.
course.
I think there's a quote like some mothers will say you're either going to be a doctor, you're either going to be a lawyer, or you're going to be a failure.
Oh, that's the
And they don't.
Indian one.
Yeah, oh, that's the Indian one.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. But they leave no room
Ah,
for anything else. So for me, right away, I could tell early on that there was something off about my family. I was very rebellious. I did not like to listen to my mom. I felt something in my gut just always told me that she was inauthentic and she was sick. And when she tried to impose her wishes onto me, I rebelled. And I was the first child to really do this. I'm the fourth. There's three older than me and one younger than me. And I was the first child to really do this. So my mom and I were, head to head all the time, but I could just tell that she wanted to live through me. She wanted me to have the life that she wanted me to have, and she didn't care about what actually made me happy. If you truly love someone, you should want them to be happy. If you got in a relationship tomorrow with a guy, and let's say that he was a drummer, and he loved drumming, and it just totally lit him up, and you fall in love with this guy, no way are you going to tell him to stop drumming. That's his passion, that's what he loves, that's what makes him happy. So why is it okay for parents to do that? And there's this whole gray area where they say, well, parents know best. A lot of parents, they're just trying to protect their kid. They just want to make sure that their kid gets into a good school so that they can make a living, so they're not poor. That's not narcissistic parenting, Shay. That's just good parenting. Yes, but there's a fine line. It's one thing for a parent to genuinely say, hey, look, um, I know that you don't want to go to college. I know you want to do this other thing. I have to talk to you as your parent about the statistics of, I think that you're going to be better off in the long run financially if you get a degree. I'm going to support you. I'm going to have your back no matter what. I'm your mom. I love you, but I just care about you so much. I want you to know that what you're doing is a little more risky and all of that. So that's a healthier route to take with your child, as opposed to, hey, we're not going to support you financially at all unless you do what we say. That's where it can really start to get kind of toxic, because you don't really know if you're setting the child up for success. What do they want? What is authentically them? And the other thing is with narcissistic parents is they care a lot about image, right? They care a
ah.
lot about image and what people think of
Yeah,
them, right?
mm, mm.
So they are going to look at their friends' children and kind of compete. And keep in mind, a lot of this, this is subconscious. These parents, they're not like, it's not like they're waking up every day like, how can I manipulate my kid? It's a complete unconscious programming,
True.
and
Mm.
most likely it's the way that they were raised. But that's a huge part of it. They see that all of these children of their friends are getting into a good school, and like they want to compete. They want their kid to go to a good school because they believe that that reflects back on them as the parent. And this is super common in the United States of America. The college system has really fallen the past couple decades. Like it's just so expensive here. A lot of times the degrees just end up not even being necessary. A lot of these kids go into debt they can't pay off. They end up moving back in with their parents and living in their basement. When in reality, for a lot of this schooling or these studies, all the child has to do, the 18-year-old or whoever, when they graduate high school, all they have to do is go online and Google about it and learn for free. But the reason that so many people are still enrolling into college is actually a result of narcissistic parenting. The parents are projecting onto the kids, A, that, oh my gosh, I need my kid to have a degree because otherwise, what will the people at the country club think of me if my child doesn't have a degree? And B, they're also projecting onto their child what college was for them when they were growing up.
Mm.
And for a lot of us, my parents, baby boomers, they, when they were growing up, college was needed and college was affordable and college did, more often than not land you in a more secure position. That's not the reality anymore. So much has shifted in the US in the past couple decades that these narcissistic parents, they can't see that. They're not living in reality, and a lot of times it's the kids like me who are rebellious, who tell the parents, no, I'm not going to go to art school, that's stupid. I can make my art and sell it online, I don't need a degree. Or hey, I want to learn video editing or video production, I'm going to go on YouTube and watch a bunch of YouTube tutorials and figure it out myself, and I don't need to spend any money on college. And so the whole reason I believe that this system of college has been upheld as much as it still has is a result of narcissistic parents and these parents not living in reality of what's actually good for their kid. They can't get out of their head of, oh, you know what? I think my kid would actually be happier if he just learned online and did what he wanted and started making his own money and didn't have to worry about getting into debt. They can't see that. That's a reality they're not in touch with because they're so obsessed with keeping up with the Joneses. And if people are still having their kids get a degree, they're going to also want their kid to get a degree. Um, so, that's just a few examples of the narcissistic parenting and how it works. The other thing that I will say that is so important, and this can definitely be correlated with narcissistic family models and narcissistic parents, but not necessarily. What I'm about to say actually applies to every single family on the face of the planet, which is that your relationship with your spouse is exactly what your child is going to mirror when they grow up and they start dating. So, for me, for example, my father was a very um, authoritative, dominating man. Not that there's anything wrong in theory with men being more dominant. Men naturally are more dominant. That's okay. But if a man is not healed, if a man is
Mm.
unhealthy and dominant, that's where it becomes very dangerous. That's where it becomes abusive. And so my father was very, very mean to my mom. He didn't physically abuse her in front of me or anything like that. But he would verbally put her down. He would make fun of her intelligence all the time. And my mom, she modeled for me that that behavior was okay because she allowed it. She just allowed it. She would, laugh off the things that he would say to her, even though he was clearly bullying her and belittling her. He had a lot of issues with women in general. So the way that I saw my father communicate about women really affected me negatively, and I'll get into that. But essentially, he was programming me. And again, it's unconscious because a lot of these parents, they're just so out of touch with themselves. They haven't done any work on themselves. So he was essentially programming me and his other daughters to believe that, we were inferior to men, and also that, we didn't deserve to be treated well by a man because my mom didn't demand good treatment for herself. She completely allowed my father to walk all over her. He, regularly made fun of her intelligence. And when I grew up and tried to get into business myself, I struggled a lot with codependency where I needed male business partners because I felt like inferior as a woman that I couldn't do it myself. And it took me a long time to figure out, why do I feel so like, why do I lack so much confidence in business. Like I feel like deep down I should be able to do this. I'm smart, I'm motivated. What's the deal here? And it took me a long time to piece that together, where I realized, oh, my dad, he always belittled my mom, and I took on the belief that as a woman, I'm just stupid. I'm going to need a man. And I ended up attracting a narcissist as a partner for many years. I was with him for 4 years. We had a business together, we had a whole life together, and he basically just put me through the same pattern. It took me years to figure it out, but I essentially just became my mother. I just became super complacent with the way that he would treat me. He was very manipulative, very abusive, did not lift me up, did not want me to feel confident about myself. And it was a direct mirror of what I saw from my parents growing up. And the craziest thing about this, Wanda, I was actually just discussing this with a friend last night, is, my dad actually kind of is living out his karma, because my dad, when we all grew up and started dating, my dad would get very frustrated with us for the that we would date. He would be like, "What the hell, you're with this guy, and he's a he doesn't treat you well and all this." But it's like, "Dad, like, how did you treat mom?" So, for all of the parents listening, I really want to encourage you to think about that. How do you treat your wife, or how do you treat your husband? That is exactly what your son or daughter is going to manifest in a partner when they grow up. So, the most important relationship in life is not the relationship with your children. The most important relationship in your life, and I'm going to get emotional, but the most important relationship in your life is the one with your spouse. That is number one. If you do not have a strong foundation with your husband or with your wife, you are going to set your children up for that same toxicity. And it doesn't matter what you tell the children. Children will do what you do, not what you say. So you can preach to the children all day about this is the way and this is what you got to do and this is how to live, but they're going to pick up on your behavior. They're going to model after exactly what you're doing. So, to sum up, and I'm happy to answer any more questions. I have a little more time, but to sum up, I would just say narcissistic parenting is when the parent projects onto the child their own insecurities. They make the child serve them, and they make the child feel guilty if they're not doing what they want. And understand that this is just a repetition compulsion from the parent's childhood. A lot of times it's basically like an energy of like, well, I did it, so now it's your turn. They don't see anything wrong with it, and they don't want to be the one to break the family line, because they feel like that's unfair. They feel like, well, wait a minute, why should I be the one now to let my child live as authentically them when I didn't get to do that? And it's hard. I get it. It sucks. It sucks to be the only one in your family to start to stand up and take responsibility and say, no more, no more. Something was fundamentally wrong with the way that my parents raised me, and I'm not going to pass that on to my kid. But the easier route, Wanda, the easier route is to just repeat the cycle and do the exact same thing. Um, Another thing I want to touch on quick is that, a lot of times parents will attribute their better parenting, like, oh, I'm a much better parent than my mom was, or I'm a much better dad than my dad was growing up. They'll attribute it to different personality traits. So, for example, like, well, my dad growing up never, was around, and he didn't go to any of my soccer games, and I go to every single one of my kids' soccer games. So I'm a different parent, I'm a better parent. Careful, because just because you exhibit different behavioral traits or personality qualities doesn't actually mean you're not still parenting your child from a place of, hey, what can this kid do for me? What can they do for me, as opposed to what I can do for them? So the father who was absent all the time, he was also acting from a place of, what can this child do for me, in a sense of, this child could just leave me alone. I don't want to be bothered. I want to work. I don't want to have to be bogged down with parenting. So what can this child do for me? Not bother me. Leave me alone. And that kid was probably programmed to like not disturb daddy, right? But the dad who grows up and does go to every one of his kids' soccer games and is super involved in his kid's life, he could still be operating from a place of narcissism where he's thinking, what can this
Mm.
kid do for me? It's just a different flavor. It's just like, this kid's going to be the best kid on the soccer team for me so that I look good. This kid's going to get straight A's for me so that I look good. So I'm going to go to every one of the school conferences and I'm going to be right there by his side. And it can appear like, oh, wow, what a loving, amazing parent. But if they're not healed and if they haven't resolved their own childhood trauma, they're not going to be doing it from a genuine place of, you know what, I'm really just here because I love my kid. I want them to be authentically them. I want them to thrive. They're going to be doing it from a place of, I want this kid to make me look good. And that's still narcissistic parenting. So, rule number one, observe yourself. It's okay if you listen to this information or you start to read about this and you start to pick up on some of it in yourself as the parent. That's okay. A lot of people start with this information and they look at their own childhood because it's easier to look at yourself from the victim standpoint of, oh my God, my parents were this way. They did this to me. No wonder I never felt good enough as a child. No wonder I felt discarded and like I had to people please and all this. That's great. If you can start to have awareness around when you were a child and how it happened to you, that's great. But where the magic really, really comes in is, can you recognize it in yourself as the parent now? Can you start to pick up on when you're getting um, anxious about something your kid is doing and you want to go control them? You see them and you're like, oh God, and you want to run over and impose and start to influence and control them. Just stop and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is this genuinely coming from a place of love? Like, my kid is going to fall in the pool if I don't intervene and they're going to drown and I want to save them. Okay, that's one thing. Or is it coming from a place of insecurity where you're like, wait a minute, actually, what my kid is doing right now, there's nothing objectively wrong with that. It's fundamentally okay, but I'm feeling insecure because of something with unresolved within myself, something that I need to work on. That I'm embarrassed that my kid is going to reflect back on me badly. So just ask yourself, just question yourself. Another great tip that I learned for parents is like, um, when your child is emotional, when your child is upset, allowing them to have those emotions. Because a lot of
Mhm.
times with narcissistic parents, they never learned how to regulate their own emotions. Their parents taught them to suppress their emotions. So now when their own child gets emotional, they start to get very uncomfortable. And the kid will be crying or yelling and they'll say, stop, stop, stop. It's like they don't want the kid to stop per se because they genuinely want the kid to feel better, which the only way to actually feel better is to get through that crying match or whatever they're in. They are actually wanting the kid to stop because they feel uncomfortable, because the parent is not in touch with their own healthy emotions. They don't know what to do with anger. They don't know what to do with sadness. That's why a lot of these parents drink. That's why people become alcoholics, or any addiction really. But what it comes down to is that children are our teachers. Children are more in touch with their emotions than we are as the adults, because in society, us as adults, we've been so programmed to suppress our
Mm.
emotions. Emotions make us very uncomfortable. The child is not uncomfortable with their emotions at all. Children authentically feel things in real time as they come up. The child falls, scrapes their knee on the sidewalk, and cries. There's no repression. They just authentically feel. And that is actually how we're meant to live as human beings. We're meant to feel the emotions as soon as they come up. So children actually get deprogrammed. It's very sad. Children come into this world completely in touch with their emotions. And us as the parents, we could actually learn from them with how in touch they are with their emotions. The problem is the parents start to program them over time to not feel safe with those emotions. Hey, stop crying, or hey, why are you
Mm.
upset about this? You shouldn't be upset. You shouldn't be sad right now. What are you sad about? There's nothing to be sad about. Don't be sad. And the parent can't see that what they're doing is they're actually projecting onto the kid that they don't feel comfortable being sad. There's nothing wrong with a child being sad. You need to allow your kid a safe space to move through those emotions if you truly want them to grow up and be a self-regulating, healthy adult. um so that is it in a nutshell. And then it also comes down to what I had mentioned, Wanda, about the relationship with the spouse. That is what your kids are going to model after and mirror after. So just be very conscious of your relationship with your spouse. Don't stay in a marriage if you know it's not right. just because you think, oh, I'm staying married for my kids. I want to stay married. I can't get a divorce because I have kids. So, I get it. Divorce sucks for children, but if it's truly a toxic marriage that can't be resolved and you're just going to be modeling for them a very poor example of marriage, you need to get a divorce. A divorce actually is what's better for the child in that situation. So just be very mindful of what you're modeling for them. Communicate with your children. Be honest with them. Don't be shameless. Oh, that's a huge thing I want to touch on quick before we wrap up. This will be my last sermon, but that's essentially what it is. These parents, they're acting from a place where they um act shameless. They act like they could never make a mistake, the parent. I cannot tell you, how many times I tried to get my mom to own up to something or apologize for something, and she just could not do it. There's no way my mom would ever admit that she made a mistake. So this is also child abuse, because when a parent acts shameless, like they could never make a mistake, they are spiritually abusing the child because they are essentially playing God. So when you have a parent who acts shameless, you have a child that is essentially going to either A, go down the path of narcissism themselves and also start to act shameless and play God and manipulate people and walk all over people because that was what their parent modeled for them, or they'll take the more victimy route, the codependent route, and they'll just become a people pleaser who walks on eggshells, who doesn't really speak their truth because they're so scared, because that parent programmed them that, hey, it's bad if you ever make a mistake. Mistakes are bad. Mistakes are not bad. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn. And that's what you need to teach your children. If your child makes a mistake, educate them. Just say, hey, this is an opportunity for you to learn. It's okay. Don't shame them, because that shame um, in the child, when the child is shamed so much, that's actually what causes them to grow up and become a narcissistic parent themselves. So when you see people that act shameless, people that act like they can never make a mistake, people with really big egos, they're actually drowning in toxic shame. Deep, deep, deep at the core of everything, even though they act shameless, they have so much shame. And that's why they can't admit that they made a mistake, because they already are drowning in shame. So when someone confronts them, like, hey, mom, this really hurt my feelings when you did this. Like, can we talk about this? No, you're misunderstanding me. I can't talk to you about this. No, no, no. It's like, well, why do they get so defensive? Why do they react like that? Because deep down, they already feel so much shame for who they are. They feel so badly about themselves that any little healthy shame that comes into the picture to try to bring awareness to them is just going to put them over the edge, and they're going to get defensive. And that's why parents act shameless. So yeah, definitely, be mindful of your own insecurities, work on yourself. Don't put your kids in a position where they have to deal with your emotional problems either. That's a big one. Emotional incest, parents basically just saying things to their children that are in a things to their children that are like inappropriate, talking about like, oh, your father, he just always does this, and it's like, that's your relationship, that's your business. You can't put it on your kid. That's also abuse, and it's also forcing the child to grow up too quickly and not allowing them to have a childhood.
I
So
think I'm getting a lot of nuggets of wisdom from what you all said, but I think the core of that is we parents become a mirror to our children. So everything that we do and say, especially also the relationship, as you said, with the husband, is very important. And I think you're very correct. As we become parents, we also heal our inner child and we tend to reflect it to our children. So being aware of our own pains and healing it by ourselves can help us, raise better children. My last question, Shay, if you will
yes.
become a parent someday, how do you think can you raise children authentically? What's really that? What do you think? How can you really raise somebody authentically?
Oh, it's a beautiful question. I think that how to raise a child authentically is to be authentic. you know um Children don't actually need to be raised. That's a myth. That's a construct that we've created in society. You ever wonder why, like, you look around and so many people are depressed and sick and unhappy and addicted? It's because we raise children. We don't need to raise them. They come into this world whole, happy, and complete, in touch with God, in touch with their emotions. They are authentically them. All we need to do is hold space for them. All we need to do is take care of them. Hey, you want some food? You want a house? Here, go play in the pool. You want some friends? We don't actually need to raise them. So I think that's the biggest misconception. A lot of people think, that there's some magic manual for creating a human. It's actually not. It's actually just a manual for how to create a conditioned human to live in today's narcissistic society. So if you want your child to be part of the new age of family that's actually authentic, living in their heart space, and living in their truth, I would say allow them to be who they are. Just allow them to be who they are. Don't try so hard to control anything. You don't need to, and that's really the transition we're going through right now on the planet. Is we're going through a transition where people are finally waking up to realize, you know what, maybe the way that we've been living is not working. Maybe the government, the system that we have, has not been working. Maybe the way that we've been parenting is not working. What can we do differently? And it all comes down to working on yourself. The more that you are whole, happy, and complete as a parent, the more the child is going to grow up um, emulating that same thing and radiating that same energy. I can be who I want because mommy is who she wants. I treat people with respect because mommy treats people with respect. I'm going to have a husband one day who loves me and treats me like a queen because daddy loves mommy and treats her like a queen. So these are all things that come down to you. You don't have to teach your kid anything. You have to teach yourself how to be these things. Be the change you want to see in the world. That's what Gandhi said. Be the change you want to see. So if you want your child to be a certain way, be that way. Don't preach and teach and project onto them. Just simply be a good person, and your child will be the same. So I would say, if I ever had a kid, I would just be very, very aware of when this child triggers me, that it's actually something in me. And it actually has nothing to do with the kid. And I would, as best I can, stop myself in my tracks to go, okay, wait a minute. Why am I triggered by this? What is it that this kid is doing that's wrong? Why do I feel this way? And it's always going to come down to something in me that needs healing, in me that needs resolving as the parent. And the more I resolve that within myself, the more I am actually loving my child. That's the best thing that you can do for your child, is work on yourself. So that's what I would say.
That's very good. Thank you very much, Shay, for sharing. That's a lot of it. But, that is why Working Moms Academy is all about. We want to help mothers heal themselves, to understand themselves more so they could become better parents. Because I've been there. I mean, I experienced burnout in 2014 and I realized, wait, why am I like this? And I realized I live the life the way my mom said. But I was like, what do I really want? But then when I started to reflect on what do I really want in life and how can I be that? And how can I do that? So that is when I was able to, move out of my burnout, become happier because I started to remember who I was and what I wanted to do. And I think a lot of parents will really learn a lot from your sharing today as you reflect back on what could have been done better. I agree with you in many aspects on how things are not working now. That's why it really needs to be fixed. And thank you so much again for them. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Wanda. And for anyone listening who wants to follow me, I do talk about narcissistic parenting all the time. You can find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Shay Rowbottom, or anywhere on social media at Shay Rowbottom. You can follow my content. I'd love to keep you up to date and informed with what I'm talking about. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, Shay.
You too.
Bye.